My name is Harold Quinn. I'm 71 years old, and for nearly 4 decades. My son Mason was the heartbeat of my life. Every decision I made, every hour I worked, was for him. Last night, he stood in my living room, clutching a lottery ticket worth $125 million, a ticket I had bought. He and his wife stared at the winning numbers. Then they stared at me. Moments later, I was standing outside my own house, drenched in the freezing rain, watching the lights go dim behind the curtains. They thought they had won it all. But as the rain soaked through my coat and the night wrapped around me, I smiled. They had missed something, the fine print on the back of that ticket. And that little line of text was about to take everything from them. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that a man's promise is worth more than any fortune. The air inside that house had always carried a quiet stillness tinged with the scent of old books, warm dust, and the jasmine my late wife, Rose, used to grow by the window. It was a comfortable kind of silence, the sort that only years of shared life can create. I sat in my old recliner, the one molded perfectly to the shape of my back, its faded fabric soft from time and memory. The TV murmured in the background, the Powerball announcer's voice unnaturally bright, like it belonged to another world entirely. Mason sat forward on the couch, his whole body coiled with tension, the lottery ticket trembling slightly in his hand as if it were made of glass. Behind him stood his wife, Claire, her hand resting on his shoulder, her face a mix of disbelief and greed. When the announcer read the first number, 23, Mason's breath caught. And that's when I felt it. The smallest curl of a smile forming on my lips. That was Rose's birthday, the second number, 8, the month we were married. A quiet certainty began to bloom in my chest. Slow and steady, like a flame-catching light, Claire's fingers gripped Mason's arm tighter, her knuckles paling as the announcer read the next 2 numbers, 16, 41. Mason's breath hitched. His eyes darted from the ticket to the screen, then back again. The room seemed to freeze in place. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway fell silent, its pendulum suspended mid-swing, as if time itself was listening. Then the final white ball appeared on the screen, -52, a perfect match for a heartbeat. Nobody moved. And then came the red Powerball number, -6. Claire's mouth fell open. Her face went pale, then flushed with disbelief. Her eyes filled, and a single tear slipped down her cheek before she let out a sound that tore through the still air, a scream of triumph. Not terror. Mason shouted, a raw, almost primal roar. They threw their arms around each other, laughing and sobbing. The sound bouncing off the old walls of my modest living room. $125 million. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it nearly sent me sinking into the chair. I wasn't thinking of yachts or vacations. I was thinking of fixing the leaky roof that had dripped through every monsoon for the last decade. I was thinking that Mason could finally pay off his business loans and the mountain of debt that had been crushing him and Claire for years. I was thinking that my boy, my only son, would finally be free from struggle. A real smile broke across my face. I had kept my promise to Rose. Our child was going to be all right. But then the laughter stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone had snuffed out the sound. When I looked up, their faces were different. The wild joy had drained away, leaving something colder in its place, sharper. Mason's eyes no longer shone with excitement. Claire had pulled slightly back, her hand slipping from his. Mason's lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. He took a slow step forward, away from her, and toward me, and in that instant, I understood. This wasn't joy anymore. It was possession. He spoke first, that same grating, self-satisfied tone I'd learned to recognize over the years, the kind that always carried more arrogance than sense. Well, Harold, he drawled, stretching out my name like it was something bitter in his mouth. Looks like you won't be needing those little pension checks anymore. The words hit me like a hammer to the chest. For the past 2 years, ever since I'd hung up my gloves at the old rail foundry, that modest monthly payment had been the only thing keeping them afloat. Every cent went toward the bills, the groceries, the loan payments. I'd handed it over gladly, without hesitation, believing I was helping my family stand a little taller. I turned to Mason, expecting him to flinch, to tell Claire to stop, but he didn't. He just stood there, looking at me with those same cold, unblinking eyes I didn't recognize. Then she spoke, and her voice was a stranger's, flat, distant, empty. Dad, she said quietly, but with a steel edge beneath the calm. We're going to have company here soon. Financial advisors, lawyers, people we need to talk to. It's time you start looking for your own place. My own place. The words floated in the air, unreal, heavy, cruel. I looked around the living room, at the worn photographs on the mantel. Rose and me on our wedding day, young and grinning, sunlight in her hair. Mason as a baby, drooling and giggling in my arms. The clock on the wall ticked once, and it felt like a nail being driven in. My own place. I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. Mason, this is my house. The house I built with your mother. We laid these floors together, with our own hands. Claire laughed then, short, sharp, ugly. It was a sound that didn't belong in this home. Not anymore, old man, she sneered. You signed the deed over to Mason last year, remember? When you had that little heart episode. The lawyer told you it wasn't smart, but you insisted. Her words struck like lightning, illuminating the memory I'd buried deep, that sterile office. The smell of antiseptic. The pen trembling in my hand while my chest still ached from the hospital stay. Mason had been there, eyes full of worrying. He told me it was just paperwork. A precaution. If anything ever happens, Dad, I'll handle it all. You won't have to worry. And I believed him. I had signed everything I had, the house, the land, the roof that sheltered 3 generations, out of love. And now, they were using that love as a weapon. The shock hit so hard. It hollowed me out from the inside. No words came. No anger, no plea, just silence. I stood there, staring at Mason, searching his face for any trace of the boy I had raised. The boy who used to curl up on my chest while I played old blues records on Saturday nights. The boy who once clung to my hand, afraid to cross the street. But there was nothing left of him now. Only distance. Only greed. Claire moved with cold, mechanical precision. She vanished down the hallway and returned a moment later, clutching my old canvas travel bag, the one I used to take fishing down by the lake every summer. She tossed it at my feet. A few shirts, a pair of worn trousers, and my shaving kit tumbled out onto the floorboards. Here are your things, she said, voice flat, without even a flicker of guilt. We don't need your pension anymore. Get out. Then she reached for me, her fingers digging into my arm, sharp and cruel. I didn't fight. I didn't even blink. I just let her pull me toward the door like a man being led through. The final act of a play he never agreed to be in. I looked at Mason one last time. He wouldn't look back. His eyes stayed locked on the far wall, the faded wallpaper patterned with little vines and blossoms that Rose had picked out 30 years ago. His jaw was clenched, his expression rigid. He was a coward. My son, my own flesh and blood, was a coward. The door opened. The cold night air rushed in like a punishment. Claire shoved me out onto the porch, and before I could turn around, the door slammed shut. A sharp click followed. The sound of the deadbolt locking. It echoed through the quiet like a verdict. Final. Absolute. That sound split my life clean into everything before, and whatever was left after. I stood there under the porch light, its dull yellow glow flickering against the rain. The duffel bag sagged at my feet. A thin drizzle began to fall, the cold cutting straight through my sweater. I didn't move. Couldn't. My body felt rooted, but my mind, it ran wild, replaying the last 10 minutes again and again, searching for a way to rewrite what had just happened. But reason was gone. So was love. So was loyalty. Through the window, I could see their silhouettes moving, laughing, pacing, talking fast, phones pressed to their ears, hands gesturing with wild excitement. They were already building their new life on the ashes of mine. The rain seeped deeper into my clothes, cooled as needles, and with it came the ghosts of my past. I saw Rose's face, pale and drawn against a hospital pillow, her hand trembling inside mine. Promise me, Hal, she had whispered, her voice barely rising above the hiss and beep of the machines. Take care of our boy, always. I had squeezed her hand, my throat locked tight with grief. I promise. I had mouthed, I promise. Then I saw myself back at the rail foundry, the furnace's searing glow burning against my skin, sweat stinging my eyes. I saw my second job too, pushing a mop down the endless, echoing hallways of an office building at 2 a.m., my back screaming in protest. Every hour of it, every ache, every bruise, all of it had been for Mason's tuition, so he could have the life I never did. A phantom ache pulled at my chest as another memory rose. The day I sold my treasured Sonny Rollins and Miles Davis finals, my only luxury, my one tether to the younger man I once was. I'd sold them for a fraction of their worth to help Claire pay off a one-time debt she swore was a mistake. I'd done it to protect Mason from stress, to keep his world steady. Each memory stabbed at me like fresh steel. Every sacrifice I'd made, every act of love had been twisted into the very road that led here. Me standing alone in the rain, locked out of my own home, discarded like garbage. The grief pressed down on my chest until it was hard to breathe. A single hot tear carved its way down my cheek, cutting through the grit. But then something shifted. The rain wasn't just cold anymore. It was clean. It was clarifying. It washed away the fog of shock and grief. And in its place, something hard, sharp, and unyielding began to rise. They thought I was just a weak old man, a relic, a burden to be tossed aside. But they had forgotten who I was. I was Harold Quinn. For 40 years, I had worked at the rail foundry, turning raw, worthless scrap into steel, hard, pure, and unbreakable. I had stood in front of roaring furnaces, faced down foremen who thought they owned me, paid off debts I never should have had, and buried the love of my life. I was a survivor. And more than that, I was a man who kept his promises. My promise to Rose had been simple: take care of our boy. But standing there in the pouring rain, I finally understood something she had never said out loud. Sometimes, taking care of someone doesn't mean shielding them from the world. Sometimes it means protecting the world from them. It means teaching a lesson so sharp, so deep, that it cuts straight through the rot and finds what's left of their soul. I straightened my back, the stiffness in my joints forgotten for the first time in years. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was planning. Reaching into my coat pocket, I pulled out my old flip phone, the one with a cracked hinge and a keypad that stuck on the 3. A faint blue glow from the tiny screen lit my face. The face that looked back wasn't broken anymore. It was set, forged by resolve. I ignored the missed calls from my sister, the text from my doctor reminding me of my appointment. I scrolled through my short list of contacts, my thumb moving slow, steady, deliberate. I passed right over Mason's name. Didn't even pause. Instead, I stopped on a name he didn't even know existed. Reggie. My oldest friend. My brother from the foundry. My finger pressed. Call. The line began to ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each ring pierced through the sound of the rain, hammering against the awning above me. I had already walked far from the house, its golden light still faint in the distance. A warm glow I no longer belonged to. Now I stood beneath the shelter of a shuttered corner hardware store, the scent of wet concrete and rust in the air, my duffel bag at my feet. On the 4th ring, a gravelly, familiar voice answered. Hal. You all right, brother? It's late. It was Reggie. Solid as ever. I took a slow breath, steadying the rumble in my chest. Reggie, I said, voice low, calm, and certain. It's Harold. We've got a situation. The numbers hit. Silence. Sharp, heavy, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him clear as day, sitting in his old armchair that always smelled faintly of pipe smoke and engine oil, the radio humming low in the background. I could see that familiar crease form between his brows as he leaned forward. You mean it hit, Hal? The numbers. All of them, I said flatly. The Powerball too. 125 million. For a second, there was silence. Then a sharp whistle cut through the static, followed by a laugh that rumbled like thunder. Hot damn. Hal, Reggie barked. 15 years, and we finally hit it. Lord Almighty, I gotta call the boys. His joy poured through the line, raw and infectious. For a brief moment, I could almost feel it too. The same wild disbelief, the same trembling thrill that had filled me just an hour ago. But that feeling was gone now. Dead and buried. I let him have his moment, then spoke, cutting clean through his laughter. Reggie, I said, my voice low and even. There's a problem. A big one. The cheer in his voice evaporated instantly. What kind of problem? Mason and Claire, I said. They kicked me out, tried to take the whole thing for themselves. The silence that followed was heavy. Then came a sound I knew too well, that quiet, dangerous stillness that came over Reggie whenever anger settled into his bones. I told him everything. The winning numbers, the look that changed in their eyes, the words, the duffel bag, the door, the lock. No embellishment, no anger. Just the cold, plain truth, one brutal detail after another. When I finished, the only sound was the soft crackle of static and the rain hammering the metal awning above me. Reggie had been the first man I met when I started at the rail foundry, 45 years ago. Two young fools with calloused hands and big dreams, standing shoulder to shoulder in a place that turned men into iron. We'd seen everything together, the strikes, the shutdowns, the layoffs. We'd stood as best men at each other's weddings, carried caskets side by side when our wives passed. Our friendship wasn't made from comfort or chatter. It was forged in heat, sweat, and loyalty. Back when the graveyard shift still roared, a dozen of us, veterans of the mill, started a ritual. Every week, $2 each. One ticket. Not because we really believed we'd win, but because it gave us something to share. A dream. A small spark against the dark. And 15 years later, that dream had finally come true. We'd made it official. A simple document, drafted years ago by the nephew of one of the guys. Nothing fancy. Just clear and binding. All 12 of us signed it and had it notarized down at the county clerk's office. It named me as the trustee, the one responsible for buying the tickets and managing the small savings account we kept for it. It wasn't about greed. It was about the bond. We had already trusted each other with our lives, standing inches from molten steel, surrounded by heat, noise, and danger. Trusting each other with a few dollars a week was easy. It was an extension of what we already were, brothers in the fire. For a long moment, there was only the steady patter of rain through the phone line. Then Reggie spoke again, his voice stripped of warmth, solid, deliberate, like a man talking through clenched teeth. "That boy of yours, Mason," he said slowly. "I never liked him. Always had eyes that wandered too fast, hands that moved too easy. But Claire Rose's boy's wife, damn, that cuts deep." He fell silent. I could hear him breathing, steady and heavy. Before he spoke again, lower now, colder. "They picked the wrong old men to mess with. How? They think we're just rusted relics, waiting for the scrap heap." Pause. Then his tone hardened into steel. "They forgot what we used to do for a living." He was right. We'd spent our lives taking pressure and heat and turning it into something that could build cities. A flicker of warmth stirred in my chest. For the first time since being thrown out, I didn't feel alone in the rain. "What do we do, Reggie?" I asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. "First thing," he said, his voice snapping into focus, "you're coming here. I'll put a pot of coffee on. Second, we don't call Mason. We don't call Claire. Not a damn word. Let 'em think they've won. And third, tomorrow morning, you're making one more call. Not to them, not to the lottery office. You're calling Amara Carter." The name sounded familiar, but faintly. "Carter?" "She related to James Carter?" I asked. "His granddaughter," Reggie confirmed. "James was one of us, remember? Worked the cranes. Hell of a man." She followed in his footsteps, but she went to law school instead of the mill. He let out a short breath, then added, "She's not one of those billboard lawyers or TV talkers. She's the real thing. They call her a shark, and that's exactly what we need when there's blood in the water." He paused, his tone softening just enough to sound like the man I'd known all my life. "I'll get you her number. Now get some rest, Hal. The work's just getting started." The next morning felt like I'd stepped into another world entirely, one that couldn't have been farther from the dim quiet of my old living room. Amara Carter's office was downtown, in a glass tower that scraped the gray winter sky. The marble lobby gleamed. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ambition. Somewhere behind me, the automatic doors hissed shut, sealing me inside a world built by people who had never worked with their hands. But I wasn't intimidated. Not anymore, because I wasn't walking in as a broken old man. I was walking in as Harold Quinn, trustee, survivor, and the man who still held the fine print. The lobby was all glass, marble, and silence, the kind of silence that hummed with money. The only sound came from the soft, measured click of expensive shoes on the polished floor. Amara Carter's office wasn't what I expected. No dusty law books or cluttered shelves, just a wide mahogany desk, two sleek black leather chairs, and a wall of glass that looked out over the skyline, a city of steel and ambition stretching to the horizon. And then there was Amara herself. She couldn't have been much older than Mason, but she carried herself with a quiet, immovable authority. Her dark blue suit was sharp enough to cut glass. Her hair was pulled into a clean, no-nonsense bun. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm, businesslike, confident. But it was her eyes that struck me most. Dark, intelligent, calculating. They missed absolutely nothing. She didn't waste time on condolences or small talk. Instead, she gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. "Mr. Quinn," she said, her voice even, clipped, professional. "Reggie Carter gave me the basics. Now tell me everything, from the very beginning. Leave nothing out. So I did. I told her the story again. Only this time it came out different, stripped bare of emotion. Reshaped by her steady gaze, the pain and betrayal that had weighed me down turned into facts, clean, precise, undeniable. I told her about the Brotherhood of the Foundry, the notarized trust agreement, the small joint account we'd kept for 15 years. I told her about signing the deed to my house over to Mason during my heart scare, how I thought I was protecting him. And I told her exactly what happened when they threw me out, the words, the shove, the door. She didn't interrupt once. Her fingers were steepled beneath her chin, her face unreadable. She didn't take a single note. But I knew, I could see it. She was recording every word in that razor-sharp mind of hers. When I finally stopped talking, the office fell into a heavy silence. Amara turned her chair slightly toward the window, her eyes sweeping across the city below, its chaos reflected faintly in the glass. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she turned back to me. And in her eyes, I saw it, not pity, not sympathy, but a flicker of cold, controlled anger. Mr. Quinn, she began, her tone calm but laced with precision. What your son and his wife did is morally bankrupt. It's a kind of betrayal that the law doesn't have proper language for. She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly, every word sharp as a blade. But that's all right, she said. Because I do. She paused, letting her words hang in the space between us like a blade. But that's not what interests me. Mr. Quinn, she said at last, what interests me is that your son and his wife have also created a legal catastrophe for themselves. Whether they realize it or not, they've handed us a gift. Amara leaned forward slightly, her expression tightening, eyes glinting like polished obsidian. Greed makes people sloppy. And your daughter-in-law in particular sounds exceptionally sloppy. They believe that holding the ticket is everything, that it makes them untouchable. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something sharper. They're wrong. The ticket is nothing but a receipt. The real proof of ownership is in the paper trail, the agreement, the account records, the pattern of behavior. And you have all of that, for the first time in nearly 24 hours. A sliver of something warm cracked through my chest. Hope. So we can fight them, I murmured. A thin, knife-edged smile touched her lips. Fight them. She repeated softly. Mr. Quinn, we're not going to fight them. She leaned back, steepling her fingers again. We're going to let them walk right into a perfectly constructed legal cage, and then we're going to lock the door behind them. Amara laid out her plan. It was stunning in its simplicity. For now, we do nothing, she said. We don't call Mason. We don't call Claire. We don't alert the lottery commission yet. We let them go public. Let them hire their advisors, give their interviews, pose for their photos. Let them start spending money they don't have. Her voice sharpened. Every car they lease on credit, every trip they book, every bragging interview they give, it's another bar on the cage they're building for themselves. She rose from her chair and walked to the window, her back to me. The city sprawling like a chessboard below. They've already committed what could be argued as conspiracy to commit fraud, she said evenly. They've exerted undue influence to seize control of your home, and they're attempting to defraud 11 other people of their rightful winnings. She turned back, her eyes locked on mine. When the time is right, we won't warn them. We'll go directly to the state lottery commission. We'll freeze the ticket. And then, her voice dropped, a final note of quiet power. We will dictate the terms of their surrender. They wanted a new life. We'll give them one, just not the one they were expecting. Amara turned from the window, her eyes alight with fierce, focused purpose. So, for now, Mr. Quinn, she said, her voice low but commanding, you go back to Reggie's place, rest. Let me and my team start gathering what we need. She moved around her desk, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. We'll need the original notarized trust agreement, the bank records from your joint account, and if possible, security footage from the store where you purchased the ticket. Let them have their victory lap, their celebration. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips, thin and knowing. The bigger the celebration, the harder the fall will be. I rose from my chair, and for the first time in years, I stood tall. The ache in my back was still there, but the weight pressing on my shoulders had shifted. It wasn't mine alone anymore. I had 11 brothers of the Foundry behind me, men who'd sweated, bled, and endured beside me. And now, I had a shark ready to fight for us. Thank you. Miss Carter, I said quietly. She nodded, her expression sharp but resolute. We're not done yet, Mr. Quinn, she said. Then that razor-thin smile returned. But we will be. when I stepped out of her office and back into the chill morning air. The city looked different. The storm hadn't passed, not even close, but for the first time, I could see a path cutting through it. While I stayed in the quiet stillness of Reggie's guest room, the world Mason and Claire were building was anything but quiet. Amara had been right. Greed hadn't just made them reckless, it had made them loud. Claire, who had always been a private, polite woman, suddenly had a brand new social media presence. Her pages, once filled with garden photos and family dinners, exploded overnight into a garish showcase of wealth and vanity. It started the very next morning after they threw me out. The first photo hit hard, them standing in front of my house, glasses of champagne raised high. The caption read, "Cheers to our new life. Big things coming. My house." They called it theirs without an ounce of hesitation or shame. A knot of cold fury twisted in my chest, but I held myself back, remembering Amara's words. Let them build their cage. The next day brought another post, a brand new cherry red convertible gleaming in the driveway. It was the same car Mason had obsessed over for years. A flashy toy he could never afford. He stood there in dark sunglasses, leaning against it with that smug smirk that once used to make me sigh. Now it made my fists clench. Claire sat behind the wheel, blowing a kiss to the camera. The caption read, "Out with the old, in with the new. Hashtag blessed, hashtag lottery winners." Double quotes. Each hashtag was a spark on dry tinder. And I knew the fire was coming. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, horrifying, predictable, and impossible to look away from. They were documenting their own downfall, one photo, one hashtag at a time. There were videos of Mason and Claire touring a monstrous, echoing mansion, walking through empty halls and talking about where they'd put their home theater and wine cellar. There were pictures of them dining at restaurants so expensive that Rose and I had only ever passed them on our anniversary walks. Peering through the glass. Claire was draped in designer clothes I couldn't name, and her once genuine smile had turned sharp and hollow, the kind that cracks just before it shatters. But the worst came a week later. They threw a lottery winners party in my backyard. The same patch of grass where I'd taught Mason to throw a baseball, where roses still bloomed stubbornly against the fence line. I saw the photos online, posted by their new friends, people who hadn't known them a month ago. Dozens of strangers filled the yard, trampling the flower beds, spilling drinks across the patio I'd built with my own two hands. Mason and Claire stood in the center, arms raised, glasses clinking, basking in the glow of money that wasn't theirs. They looked like royalty presiding over a kingdom of fools. Each post was a fresh stab to the heart, but I made myself watch. Every laugh, every boast, every snapshot was another nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. Amara's voice echoed in my head, calm, clinical, certain. They're writing our legal arguments for us. Mr. Quinn, just be patient. And patience, well, that was something the Foundry had taught me better than most. So while they partied, Reggie and I went to work. Our first stop was a small, unassuming credit union tucked between an auto shop and a bakery on the south side, the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades. A polite young manager led us through the quiet corridors to the vault. The air was cool and still, the hum of the fluorescent lights loud in the silence. I took a deep breath, slid my key into the lock. Reggie did the same. With a soft metallic click, the safe deposit box opened, revealing a single, thick manila envelope. I lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of the papers inside, the weight of 15 years of trust. We carried it into a small private room, closed the door behind us, and laid the envelope on the table. This wasn't just paper. It was the heart of everything, the brotherhood, the pact, the proof, the foundation of the storm we were about to unleash. I broke the seal carefully and slid the contents onto the table. There it was, the Brotherhood of the Foundry official Powerball agreement. 3 pages, simple, straightforward, typed up on an old word processor 15 years ago. But every line carried the weight of decades of trust. The names of all 12 founding members were listed clearly, followed by the rules of the pool, and one powerful, unambiguous statement: all winnings, regardless of amount, shall be shared equally among the undersigned. At the bottom, 12 signatures, some neat, others barely legible scratches made by tired hands that had known more steel than ink. Each signature was stamped with the seal of a public notary, dated 10 years back. It was perfect. Ironclad. Reggie looked down at the document, his eyes narrowing, then met my gaze, a slow, Grim smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. This, he said, tapping the paper with one thick finger, is the hammer. I nodded. Then let's start gathering the nails. We went back to his place, my temporary refuge, and sat at his old kitchen table. The smell of strong coffee and motor oil thick in the air. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the online portal for our shared account, the Foundry Fund. As we called it, the screen came to life, glowing pale in the dim kitchen light, showing a history that was steady and familiar, the same rhythm we'd kept for 15 years. Every week, 11 deposits, $2 each. Every week, one withdrawal, $24, made with the debit card that never left the small slot in my wallet. Reggie and I printed everything, line after line. Month after month, 15 years of loyalty written out in black and white. The pages formed a quiet, almost sacred rhythm as they came off the printer, a digital testament to a brotherhood forged in heat and labor. We highlighted every transfer from each man's personal account, tracing the clear path of money from 11 men, straight into the fund that paid for the winning ticket. It was dull, methodical work, and it was beautiful. This wasn't rage or revenge. This was the truth, written in the cold, objective language of numbers. Numbers don't lie. They don't bend. They don't care about tears or betrayal. And that's what made them powerful. The final piece of the puzzle, though, that was the hardest one. We needed to prove that our money had bought that exact ticket. We drove to the little corner shop on Maple and 5th, the same place I'd bought our tickets every Friday for the last 5 years. The bell above the door jingled when we came in. The owner, Mr. Park, who'd run the place longer than he'd owned the building, looked up from his crossword and gave me a warm nod. Double quotes. How good to see you. Usual today? He asked. I shook my head. Not today, Reggie. I need a favor. I kept my voice low and didn't mention the number on the line, only that there was a dispute over a ticket I'd purchased here. The friendly softness left his face. He was a small businessman who knew what honesty meant. These new people, he muttered, shaking his head. No respect. He led us to the cramped back office where a bank of old security monitors showed a grid of grainy black and white feeds. He rewound the tape to last week. There I was on the screen, a slightly stooped old man in a tired jacket. The angle caught everything. The debit card sliding across the payment terminal, the lottery terminal printing the slip, and the precise moment I folded the ticket and tucked it into my wallet. Can you make a copy of that for me, Mr. Park? I asked. He didn't hesitate. For you, Hal, anything. He downloaded the file onto a small flash drive and handed it over. As we left, he squeezed my shoulder, blunt and sincere. I hope you get what's yours. Folks forget where they came from. With that video we had it all, the hammer, the notarized agreement, the nails, the bank records, and now the blueprint of the crime, the store footage. The next morning, Reggie and I drove downtown again. We walked into Amara Carter's immaculate office carrying a plain briefcase. Inside, the notarized agreement, a thick stack of bank statements, and the small flash drive with the footage from Mr. Park's store. We laid everything out across Amara Carter's wide mahogany desk. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes moved methodically over every piece of evidence, the notarized agreement, the thick stack of printed bank records, the flash drive glinting like a bullet under the office lights. She read each line of the Brotherhood document, her gaze sharp and unblinking. Then she scanned through the bank statements, her fingertip tracing the perfect rhythm of 15 years of $2 deposits. Finally, she slipped the flash drive into her laptop and clicked play. The grainy video filled the screen. Me, older and stooped, sliding the Foundry debit card through the reader. The lottery terminal printing the ticket, my hand folding it neatly into my wallet. When the video ended, Amara leaned back in her chair, the mask of polite professionalism she'd worn since our first meeting was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous, the look of predatory satisfaction. It was the look of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. Gentlemen, she said, her voice slow and certain, they are well and truly finished. She turned back to her desk, and suddenly her hands were in motion, her fingers flying across the keyboard with frightening speed. For 10 full minutes, the only sound in the room was the rapid-fire rhythm of her typing. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore, she was a weapon, and she'd just been aimed. When she finally stopped, she hit print. The machine hummed, spitting out a single page that could end everything. It wasn't addressed to Mason or Claire. It was addressed to the legal department of the State Lottery Commission. The letter was formal, cold, and surgical in its precision. It cited the existence of a registered trust, included references to a multi-party ownership agreement, and formally requested that all funds associated with the winning ticket number be frozen immediately, pending a full investigation into fraudulent claims of ownership. She signed it with a smooth, practiced flourish, then sealed it in an envelope. Turning to the young paralegal standing quietly by the door, she said simply, "Send this by courier." I want it on their desk before lunch. He nodded once and disappeared down the hall. Amara leaned back, her expression cool, but her eyes alive with a quiet, razor-edge triumph. "The trap," she said, that thin, confident smile curling her lips, "is now set. All we have to do is wait for them to walk into it." The week that followed was one of the quietest of my entire life. At Reggie's house, the days bled together in a calm, simple rhythm: morning coffee, long silences, the soft creak of the old porch swing. The world outside was loud and cruel, but inside that small house, time felt slower, deliberate. And while I waited, Mason and Claire were busy writing the ending of their own story. We'd wake before sunrise, Reggie and I, and sit out on his porch with steaming mugs of coffee while the first light stretched across the fields. We talked about everything and nothing, about the old days at the foundry, about Rose and his late wife Clara, about the creaks and aches that came with being 70. We didn't talk about the money. We didn't have to. It hung between us, quiet and heavy, a storm gathering somewhere just past the horizon. We were simply waiting for the thunder to break. During the day, I helped him in his garden. We pulled weeds, tied up tomato vines, and spread mulch beneath the hydrangeas. The work was simple, steady, grounding. My hands, which had spent a lifetime shaping steel, found a strange comfort in the dirt. It was honest. It didn't lie. In the evenings, we'd sit at the kitchen table and play chess. The soft clack of the wooden pieces filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time in a very long time, I felt peace, a fragile peace, the kind that only exists in the eye of a hurricane, but peace. Nonetheless. I stopped checking Claire's social media pages. Amara had asked me not to. "Let my team handle that," she'd said. "Stay detached, Mr. Quinn. It's better for your blood pressure." So I waited. I trusted the plan. I trusted the sharp, brilliant woman who was now the general of our quiet little army. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was out on the porch, watering roses, the ones I'd carefully dug up and replanted in pots when I left my house. The blooms were smaller this year, but still stubbornly alive. My phone buzzed in my pocket. When I pulled it out and saw Amara Carter's name flash across the screen, my heart gave a small, nervous leap. I answered, keeping my voice even. "Mr. Quinn," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, a smile as sharp as a blade. "The fish have taken the bait." Later that evening, Reggie and I sat across from her once more in that pristine glass-walled office. She told us everything, her tone cool and clinical, but her eyes gleamed with a hunter's thrill. According to Amara, Mason and Claire had finally made their move. They'd hired a lawyer of their own, a showboat with a cheap suit, an expensive watch, and an ego that entered the room before he did. His name, I would learn, was Barry Denton. They had scheduled their appointment with the State Lottery Commission for that very morning. Amara painted the scene for us in perfect, vivid detail. Mason and Claire arrived at the lottery headquarters, like royalty stepping onto a red carpet. He wore a brand new suit that was just a little too tight across the shoulders, probably tailored overnight. She had on a bright, loud dress and a pair of oversized sunglasses that swallowed half her face. They weren't walking, they were striding, radiating that smug, uncheckable confidence of people who believed the world had finally bent in their favor. Amara said she could picture them rehearsing in front of the mirror for days, practicing their humble gratitude faces for the press conference and the oversized check. But what waited for them wasn't a photo op. It was a reckoning. When they stepped into the marble lobby, they weren't greeted by smiling PR staff or flashing cameras. Instead, a stern-faced woman in a gray suit approached, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as the Director of Legal Affairs. She didn't smile. She didn't shake hands. She simply said, "Right this way, please," and led them down a long, silent hallway, away from the bright, decorated press room. At the end of that hallway was a plain, windowless conference room. Amara called it the bad news room. The air was cold. The walls were beige. The only furniture was a large polished table surrounded by stiff, uncomfortable chairs. Waiting for them inside were two people, the director and a man she introduced as the commission's chief counsel. There were no balloons. No cameras. No oversized check. Just a pitcher of water, 3 glasses, and a thick, ominous-looking legal file placed neatly in the center of the table. Amara said you could see it, that first flicker of confusion crossing Claire's face. This wasn't what they'd imagined. This wasn't the dream moment they'd practiced for the cameras. This felt serious. They sat down slowly. The arrogance didn't vanish, not yet, but it faltered just enough to show the first crack. The director began to speak, her voice even, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. Thank you for coming in, Mr. and Mrs. Quinn, she said. We've received your preliminary claim for the $125 million Powerball jackpot. Mason leaned forward, his confidence returning in full force. That's us, he said, puffing out his chest, the smirk back on his face. Guess we're the lucky ones, huh? The director didn't return his smile. She didn't even blink. She simply folded her hands over the legal file and said, very quietly, let's discuss that. The director opened the thick legal file in front of her. Her tone was calm, professional, utterly without apology. Unfortunately, she began, we will not be able to process your claim at this time. She looked up briefly, her eyes impassive. As of 9 a.m. yesterday, a legal injunction was filed against this specific ticket number. The prize money has been frozen pending investigation. Amara said later that the atmosphere in the room changed instantly, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of it. The air crackled with a sharp, almost audible tension. Claire's face went pale beneath her makeup. Mason's smirk fell away, his jaw hanging slack. Frozen. He stammered, the word tumbling awkwardly from his lips. What do you mean frozen? That's our ticket. We won. For the first time, the commission's chief counsel spoke, a dry, steady voice that carried the weight of procedure and finality. According to the legal notice we received, he said, there is a significant dispute regarding the ownership of the ticket. A claim has been filed on behalf of a trustee entity, citing a pre-existing notarized agreement establishing collective ownership among multiple parties. The words hit them like a foreign language. Trustee entity, notarized agreement, collective ownership. These weren't terms from their world. These were the weapons of ours. Mason predictably began to unravel. What trustee? What agreement? That's nonsense. He barked, his voice climbing an octave. My wife's name is on the ticket. That's all that matters. He reached into his jacket, fumbling for his wallet with shaking hands, pulling out the crumpled ticket like a talisman. But the director raised one hand. Calm. Steady. Final, sir, she said evenly. Possession of the ticket is not the sole determinant of ownership. The claim filed against it is substantial and supported by extensive documentation. She closed the file with a soft, decisive thud. Until this matter is resolved, she continued, the State Lottery Commission will not, and legally cannot, release any funds. Panic took hold. Claire sat frozen, her hands twisting in her lap, her lipstick-smeared smile gone, replaced by silent fear. Mason, on the other hand, turned crimson with fury. He slammed his palm on the table, shouting about lawsuits, about corruption, about how this was some kind of shakedown, and how, when he was done, they were going to own this entire damn state. But no one responded. The director just sat there, expressionless, a bureaucratic wall he couldn't climb. And in that quiet, sterile room, the first cracks of their downfall echoed louder than any celebration ever could. The commission's lawyer simply waited for Mason to finish. He didn't flinch at the shouting, didn't interrupt. His expression never changed, a mixture of mild curiosity and profound boredom, the kind reserved for men who've seen this kind of meltdown 100 times before. When Mason finally ran out of steam, red-faced and panting, the lawyer spoke with uncheckable calm. You are, of course, welcome to pursue any legal action you see fit, he said dryly. I would advise you to speak with your legal counsel. This meeting is now concluded. Amara later told us that what happened next was almost comical. They scrambled, literally scrambled, to call their attorney. Mason's hands were shaking so hard he nearly dropped his phone. When he finally managed to hit the right buttons, he put it on speaker, as if to make a statement. A mistake? Barry Denton's voice came through the line, slick and overconfident, echoing through that cold, sterile conference room. After Mason's breathless, panicked explanation, Barry laughed, a short, oily chuckle that oozed arrogance. Don't you worrying about a thing, he boomed. This is a classic nuisance claim. Some old guy trying to grab a slice of the pie. We'll have this cleared up by the weekend. Just a shakedown. We'll countersue them into oblivion. Across the table, the commission's lawyer simply raised one eyebrow. The director exchanged a brief, knowing glance with him, a silent acknowledgement between professionals. In that moment, they knew exactly what they were dealing with. Amateurs. The call ended abruptly, leaving the room heavy with silence. Reality began to set in. The $125 million, the life they had already started living, was slipping through their fingers like sand in a sieve. They weren't lottery winners anymore. They were defendants in a legal war they didn't even understand. A formal meeting was scheduled for the following week. All parties. Both lawyers, everything out in the open. Amara finished recounting the story with the same calm precision she'd maintained throughout. Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. The cage is built, she said softly. They've taken the bait. And now, she paused, her lips curling into that thin, predatory smile. The door has just slammed shut. The following Thursday, we gathered in the conference room on the top floor of Carter and Associates, a glass-walled box that seemed to float above the city. The table stretched across the room like an altar, carved from a single slab of dark polished wood so glossy it reflected the gray clouds rolling outside. A black mirror. On our side sat Reggie, Amara, Carter, and me. We weren't there as victims anymore. We were there as the storm. Reggie sat beside me in his Sunday best, his posture straight, his presence as solid and unmoving as a mountain. He didn't fidget or glance around. He simply was, a pillar carved from the same steel we once worked with. Amara, Carter sat on his other side, the very embodiment of calm, controlled power. A single thick file rested on the table in front of her. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't need to. She was perfectly still, a predator waiting for the prey to step into reach. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching a scene from someone else's life. The anger was gone now, burned away to ash. What remained was a heavy, cold sadness, the kind that doesn't explode. It just settles. I looked down at my hands resting on the glossy black surface of the table. They were rough and scarred. The hands of a man who'd worked his entire life. Hands that had once held Rose, that had taught Mason to ride a bike, that had built a home board by board. Now those same hands were here to dismantle a lie. The door opened. They entered. Barry Denton led the way, just as Amara had described him. A cheap suit pretending to be expensive. A gold watch that flashed too bright, a smile that never made it to his eyes. He carried his briefcase like a prop, swinging it with a swagger that reeked of desperation disguised as confidence. Behind him came Mason and Claire. Mason's chest was puffed out, trying to project righteous anger, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted nervously across the room, never quite meeting mine. And then I saw her. Claire. For a moment, my heart clenched. She looked small. That expensive dress she wore seemed to be wearing her, swallowing her whole. Her skin was pale, her eyes shadowed, her smile brittle. For a fleeting second, I saw the woman she used to be, the one who had shyly called me dad when Mason first brought her home, the one who used to bring Rose flowers from the garden. Then she looked at Mason, and just like that, the mask came back, smooth, cold, defiant. They took their seats opposite us. The long stretch of polished wood between us might as well have been a canyon, a chasm carved deep by greed, betrayal, and silence. Barry started without so much as a greeting. He dropped his briefcase on the table, leaned back, and began speaking loudly, performing for an invisible jury that existed only in his head. All right, let's cut to the chase, he said, gesturing toward us with the easy arrogance of a man who mistook confidence for competence. My clients, Mason Quinn and Claire Quinn, are the rightful and sole owners of the winning Powerball ticket. His voice filled the room, too loud for the space, bouncing off the glass and steel like a false trumpet. Across from him, Amara Carter didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just watched him, utterly still, waiting for him to finish building his house of cards. And beside her, Reggie and I sat in silence, because we knew something Barry Denton didn't. The first blow had already been struck, and he hadn't even realized the walls were closing in. Barry cleared his throat and launched into his performance, his voice booming across the glass room like a bad actor who didn't know when to quit. We're here today as a courtesy, he began, to put an end to this ridiculous, baseless claim. Frankly, it's an embarrassment. He leaned forward, pointing a manicured finger at me, his gold watch flashing under the lights. Mr. Quinn, he said, his tone dripping with condescension, While we understand that you may feel entitled to some of your son's good fortune, that feeling doesn't create a legal reality." He smirked, warming to his own arrogance. "The fact is simple. The fact is indisputable. Mr. Mason Quinn's name is on the ticket. He is the legal owner. End of story." He chuckled, then, a low, patronizing sound that oozed contempt. "And this claim of what was it? A Brotherhood of the Foundry," he said, laughing. "It's a pathetic, transparent attempt to squeeze money out of a family man. We see this kind of thing all the time." He sat back, spreading his arms as if he'd just delivered divine truth. "Now, out of the goodness of my clients' hearts," he continued, "we are prepared to offer you a small one-time settlement to make this nonsense disappear. Take it or we'll see you in court, where not only will we win, but we'll sue you for malicious prosecution." He ended with a smug grin, clearly expecting gasps or outrage. He looked toward Mason and Claire, who were already puffing themselves up again, their confidence creeping back like rot beneath the surface. The silence that followed was thick. Through it all, Amara Carter hadn't moved, not a single muscle. Her hands remained folded neatly on the closed file before her, her expression unreadable, patient, composed, deadly. She let the silence stretch long enough for Barry's words to linger, to curdle, to rot in the air. Then, finally, she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she opened the file. The sound of paper against polished wood cut through the stillness like a whisper of thunder. "Thank you for your assessment, Mr. Denton," she said. Her voice was soft, smooth, but it carried the kind of cold steel that could cut bone. "Now," she continued, "allow me to present you with the actual legal reality." She slid a single document across the glossy black table toward him. "This," she said, her voice rising just enough to fill the room, "is the original notarized agreement of the Brotherhood of the Foundry." Barry blinked, his smirk faltering. "This," Amara went on, "is a legally binding partnership trust agreement, signed and notarized over a decade ago by 12 individuals. It explicitly establishes that all lottery winnings purchased through the trust's collective funds are the shared property of all 12 members in equal measure." She leaned back slightly, watching him. Barry picked up the document, his fingers trembling slightly as his eyes scanned the page. The bolded title, the 12 names, the handwritten signatures, the notary stamp, clear and irrefutable. And with each line he read, the color drained a little more from his face. Across from him, Mason's self-assured posture sagged, and Claire's hand crept toward his under the table, not in love, but in fear. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, the sound of arrogance collapsing under the weight of truth. Mason leaned over Barry's shoulder, his eyes scanning the page. With each line he read, the blood drained from his face. By the time he reached the signatures, he looked almost translucent. Amara Carter's voice didn't soften. It didn't need to. It rolled across the table, calm, deliberate, relentless. "The ticket in question," she said, "was not purchased by a private individual." Her words cut through the air like the hiss of a forge. "It was purchased by Mr. Harold Quinn, acting in his official capacity as trustee of the Brotherhood of the Foundry. Therefore, the ticket does not belong to an individual, it belongs to the trust." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Barry, her tone cooling even further. "Your client's name on the front of the ticket," she said, "is legally irrelevant when a prior, notarized trust agreement exists proving collective ownership. Mrs. Quinn was merely in possession of the ticket, not ownership." Across the table, Mason's jaw twitched. He turned to Claire, whose eyes were fixed on the document as if it might bite her. The defiance that had propped them up for weeks was starting to crumble, replaced by something new, the cold whisper of doubt. But Amara wasn't finished, not even close. She reached for the second file, a much thicker stack of papers, and slid it across the table with deliberate precision. "This," she said, "is the complete banking history of the trust's dedicated account. 15 years worth of records." Her voice sharpened as she continued. "It shows a clear, unbroken pattern of deposits from 11 members and 1 weekly withdrawal, the exact amount used to purchase each ticket. Every transaction, every signature, every withdrawal time-stamped, archived, and traceable." Then she turned her laptop toward them. A few quick clicks, and the grainy black and white footage filled the screen. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the computer. There I was, on the screen, older, tired, walking to the counter at Mr. Park's store, sliding the Brotherhood's debit card through the terminal. The machine printed out the ticket. I folded it neatly. Placed it in my wallet, turned and left. Amara's tone remained steady, almost surgical. "And this," she said, gesturing toward the screen, is video evidence showing the trust's funds being used to purchase the specific winning ticket at the exact time and location recorded by the state lottery database. She paused just long enough for the silence to thicken. What you have here, Mr. Denton, she continued, her voice turning to tempered steel, is not a simple ownership dispute. What your clients have attempted to do is defraud 11 individuals of their rightful property. Her next word landed like a hammer blow. That, she said softly, is a felony. The word hung in the air like smoke, heavy, acrid, inescapable. Barry Denton, the slick lawyer who'd strutted in 15 minutes ago, was now utterly speechless, his mouth open and closed twice. But no sound came out. Mason's breathing grew heavy. His face turned a mottled red, his fists clenched on the table. He looked cornered, like a man realizing, too late, that he'd built his own cage. And sitting across from him, Amara Carter didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just waited. Because the trap wasn't just closed. It had locked. But Amara Carter wasn't finished. She had already laid the legal foundation, the facts, the documents, the signatures. Now came the final, brutal stroke. Her tone changed, no longer clinical, no longer detached. It carried something deeper now, a quiet, righteous anger. But beyond the fraud, she said, her voice slow and steady, there is the matter of intent and character. She clicked another file on her laptop. The screen flickered, then filled with color, a gallery of images, Claire's social media posts. There they were, smiling in front of my house, champagne flutes raised high. There was Mason, leaning smugly against that cherry-red convertible. There were pictures from their lottery winner party, strangers laughing, spilling drinks in my backyard. Amara clicked again. Up came screenshots of bank transactions, deposits for a new mansion, receipts for designer clothes, all dated in the days immediately following the night they'd thrown me out into the rain. Her voice darkened, gathering power like a slow-building storm, while the other members of this trust, men in their 70s and 80s, men who live quietly on modest pensions after a lifetime of backbreaking labor, waited patiently. She turned her gaze to Mason and Claire. Your clients, she said, her voice cutting clean through the air, were on a spending spree. They were spending money that did not belong to them. Amara closed her laptop gently, her eyes never leaving Barry's. This isn't just evidence of intent to defraud, Mr. Denton, she said, her tone now sharp as tempered steel. This is evidence of a profound and staggering disrespect, a breathtaking display of greed. The room fell utterly silent. No one moved. The faint hum of the laptop fan was the only sound in the air. And then the silence broke. Claire sobbed. The sound tore through the room, raw and unguarded. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Mason didn't move. He just stared at the screen, at the images of his own arrogance, his own downfall. His skin was the color of paper, his jaw tight, eyes wide and empty. Every smiling photo, every hashtag, every champagne glass, all of it had become evidence. The law had already crushed their argument. Now Amara had crushed their illusion. And it was my turn. I leaned forward, pressing my hands flat against the cool, polished wood of the table. They were steady. I looked at Claire, at my daughter-in-law, until she lowered her trembling hands and met my eyes. Her cheeks were wet with tears, but there was no remorse there. Only fear. When I spoke, my voice didn't shake. It wasn't the voice of a frail old man. It was the voice of a father, calm, heavy, and filled with the weight of a lifetime's love, and the unbearable ache of betrayal. Daughter, I said, my words cutting through the silence. Did you even read whose name is on that lottery ticket? I asked quietly. Claire looked at me, her eyes wide and wet, confusion flickering across her tear-streaked face. Her voice trembled. It's my name, she stammered. It's right there. My name is on it. I slowly shook my head. The last piece of the trap was about to spring shut. No, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. You saw your name, but you never read the fine print. You were so blinded by the numbers on the front that you never thought to turn it over. The room went utterly still. I reached into my wallet, the same worn leather I'd carried since before Mason was born, and pulled out a photocopy, the back of the ticket. I slid it across the table toward them. I signed it the moment I bought it. I said quietly, right there on the signature line. They all leaned forward. Barry, Mason, Claire, their faces pale, their eyes scanning the paper like people searching for a way out that wasn't there. And there it was, in my steady, familiar handwriting. Harold Quinn, trustee for the Brotherhood of the Foundry. Their silence was absolute. Your name on the front, I said, turning to Claire, my voice breaking with something closer to sorrow than anger. Was just for holding it. That's all it ever was. I was going to put it in the safe deposit box the next morning. I trusted you with everything. That was it. The final blow. It wasn't a legal point or a courtroom tactic. It was truth. Simple. Human. Devastating. A truth that laid bare everything, my trust, and their betrayal of it. Barry Denton, the slick lawyer who had strutted in like a peacock, just sat there, deflated, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and blank. He knew he was beaten, utterly and completely. Mason slammed his fist against the table. The sound was sharp, hollow, impotent, the kind of gesture a man makes when he finally understands he's lost everything and it's his own fault. And Claire. She stared at the photocopy, her hands trembling, her face draining of color. Then came the sound, low at first, then rising, a raw, guttural wail that tore through the sterile conference room like something ancient and broken. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even grief. It was the sound of a soul shattering under the weight of its own choices. She had been so sure of her victory, so consumed by her greed, that she had missed the simplest, most human detail. She'd never turned the ticket over. She'd been too busy dreaming of her new life to see the old one she was burning to the ground. And now, sitting in that cold, glass-walled conference room high above the city, with Amara Carter watching in silence and Reggie solid as the steel we once forged, they finally understood. They hadn't just lost the money, they had lost everything. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound could ever be. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of devastation, of something breaking so completely it could never be put back together. Claire's wail had died down to a series of ragged, uneven sobs. She was hunched over the table, her face buried in her hands, her sleek designer dress now looking like an ill-fitting costume on a shattered doll. Mason sat frozen beside her, his face twisted into a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. He stared at the photocopy of the ticket, his eyes locked on the line where my handwriting spelled out the words Harold Quinn, trustee for the Brotherhood of the Foundry, as if he could burn it away by sheer will. And Barry Denton, the man who'd strutted in full of noise and arrogance now, looked like someone who'd just witnessed a slow-motion car crash he couldn't stop. He was pale, sweating, utterly silent for the first time since the meeting began. Across from them, Amara Carter let the silence hang, a full, unbroken minute of it. She allowed the weight of their defeat to sink deep, to press into their bones, until even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, devoid of triumph. She wasn't a shark anymore. She was a surgeon preparing to make the final incision. Now, she said, her tone cutting through the suffocating quiet, we come to the matter of what happens next. She folded her hands neatly on the closed file in front of her, her gaze fixed on Barry, but her words were for Mason and Claire. As I see it, she continued, your clients have two available paths. I suggest you listen very carefully. Her tone was clinical, almost gentle, but underneath it was something sharp, precise, and final. Option 1, she began, is the path of reason. Your clients will sign a legally binding document here and now, acknowledging the legitimacy of the Brotherhood of the Foundry's claim. They will publicly state that this was all a misunderstanding, an unfortunate lapse in judgment. She turned her gaze toward Claire, who was trembling silently, and then to Mason, whose jaw flexed as he stared at the table. They will formally relinquish the ticket to its rightful trustee, Mr. Quinn. In exchange for this full and immediate cooperation, the trust will agree not to pursue criminal charges for fraud. Amara paused, letting the lifeline hang in the air, gleaming faintly in the ruins they'd made for themselves. Mr. Quinn, she continued, glancing toward me, will receive his 1/12th share of the winnings. What he chooses to do with that share will be his decision and his alone. She let the words settle. The offer was clean, fair, merciful, far more merciful than they deserved. It was a way out, a small, narrow bridge over the fire they had built with their own greed. And as the silence returned, thick and suffocating, I could see it in their faces. They finally understood what mercy looked like, and how close they were to losing even that. Then Amara Carter outlined the alternative. Her voice dropped just a fraction, but the temperature in the room seemed to fall with it. Option 2, she said, her words measured and sharp, is the path of consequence. She folded her hands on the table again, her eyes now like dark glass. You can choose to fight this, she continued quietly, but understand what that means. You will be facing not one, but 11 separate civil lawsuits for the recovery of misappropriated funds and assets. Her tone never rose, but each word landed with the weight of a hammer, simultaneously. I will forward this entire file to the district attorney's office with a formal recommendation to pursue criminal charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud and theft by deception. She glanced at the file in front of her, thick, organized, damning. Your client's recent extravagant purchases, the mansion deposit, the luxury vehicle, the designer goods, will be presented as clear evidence of intent. Their bank accounts will be frozen. Their assets will be seized. They will likely face prison time. She leaned back slightly, her voice softening. But it only made the words cut deeper. And in the end, she said, after all the legal fees, the investigations, the media coverage, and the humiliation, they will lose. And they will be left with nothing. Her gaze swept across the table, steady and unflinching. Nothing, she repeated, but a criminal record, and a mountain of debt. She paused, letting the silence expand, then finished with chilling finality. The choice is yours. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, finally, Barry Denton found his voice, or what was left of it. It came out as a hoarse whisper. Desperate and broken, he leaned toward Mason and Claire, his words trembling out fast and low. Take the deal, he urged. For God's sake, take it. There's no way to win this. They have everything, every angle, every document, every piece of proof. You have to take the deal. Mason, however, wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. There was still one flicker of that old, ugly defiance burning behind his eyes. He pushed up from his chair so suddenly it screeched against the floor. His face was red, his jaw shaking, his finger trembling as he jabbed it toward me. You did this, he spat, his voice cracking under the strain. You just couldn't let us be happy, could you? You had to ruin it, you bitter old man. Before I could speak, Reggie stood up. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He was a mountain of a man, built from 40 years of labor and silence. And when he rose to his full height, the room itself seemed to shrink. He crossed his arms and stared straight at Mason, steady, unblinking. The fire in Mason's eyes flickered, then died. He sank back into his chair, smaller now, hollow, deflated, a bully stripped of his bravado, exposed for what he really was. And then all eyes turned to Claire. This was her decision to make now, her father-in-law or her future, her integrity or her ruin. She lifted her head slowly, her face streaked with tears, her mascara smeared like bruises. And for a fleeting, fragile moment, just long enough for me to catch it, I saw her as she once was, the kind, laughing girl who used to bring Rose's favorite flowers from the garden, a single flicker of the daughter I thought I had. I saw it, just for a moment, a flicker of something real in Claire's eyes, a hint of shame, a glimmer of regret, but it was gone as quickly as it came, swallowed by the bitter poison of everything she'd lost. She knew she had no choice. Slowly, she looked toward Barry Denton, her voice gone, her face pale and hollow. Then she gave the smallest of nods, almost imperceptible. But final. It was done. Amara Carter didn't waste a second. She moved with quiet, merciless precision, the way a surgeon does when she knows exactly where to cut. From her file, she drew out a single document, thick, stamped, written in dense, unforgiving legalese, a confession and a surrender. She laid it on the table in front of Claire. Along with the pen, sign here, she said. Her voice was calm, not cruel, not triumphant, just absolute. Claire's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. She tried to steady it, but it shook violently, the ink scratching across the page. Her signature, once neat, confident, practiced, was now a jagged, broken line. When she finished, Mason took the pen next. He signed in a quick, angry scrawl, the motion of a man trying to end his own humiliation as fast as possible. And then came the final act of surrender. The ticket, said Amara, her tone soft but sharp enough to slice through the air. Claire froze. Then, with a trembling hand, she reached into her designer purse and pulled it out, the small slip of paper that had destroyed everything. The $125 million ticket. It looked ordinary, almost fragile. Once, it had been a dream, then, a weapon. Now, it was nothing more than evidence of their shame. She held it there for a long, trembling moment, staring at it, like it might still whisper promises that could save her. Then, finally, She pushed it across the table toward me. The sound it made as it slid over the polished wood was small and hollow, a whisper of what it had once meant. She couldn't look at me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table. On the reflection of her own trembling hands, the ticket came to rest just in front of me. I stared at it. Then I looked at her. There was no triumph in me. No satisfaction. Only a vast, cavernous sadness, the kind that sits in your chest and never leaves. This was justice. Maybe, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a funeral. I had won back what was ours, but I had lost something far greater, my child. Slowly, I picked up the ticket and handed it to Amara. She slipped it into a new, clean envelope, unmarked, unsullied, and sealed it carefully. Then she stood. "This concludes our business," she said evenly. "A copy of the signed agreement will be sent to your counsel. We'll handle the remainder with the lottery commission. You are free to go." Mason and Claire rose from their chairs like ghosts, drained, mechanical, hollow. Gary Denton was the first to move, nearly tripping over his briefcase in his rush to escape the room. Desperate to flee the wreckage of his own arrogance, the door closed behind them with a soft click. And for a long, long moment, no one spoke. Mason grabbed Claire's arm and pulled her toward the door without looking back. Just before she stepped out of the room, she hesitated. She glanced over her shoulder at me, eyes filled with a toxic mixture of shame, hatred, and a desperate, unspoken question. I had no answer for her. I just met her gaze. My own face a mask of sorrow. Then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight, pressing down on the room. The story broke a few days later, but it wasn't the story Mason and Claire had dreamed of. The local news didn't feature a lucky, young couple clutching a giant check. Instead, they ran a feature on the Brotherhood of the Foundry. There was a photo of the 12 of us, taken in front of the old steel mill, a group of gray-haired men in worn work jackets, smiling like we'd just clocked out one last time. The headline read, 15 years of friendship pays off for retired steel workers. The article celebrated our loyalty, our patience, our shared history. It was a feel-good story, and the city embraced it. For a week, we were local heroes, proof that quiet, ordinary men could still stand by their word. As for Mason and Claire, they were reduced to a single vague sentence. The prize was claimed by the trust after a brief ownership dispute was amicably resolved. They weren't villains. They were something worse. They were a footnote. Their desperate grasp for fame had left them with nothing but obscurity. They had been erased from the story. They tried to hijack. The money arrived a few weeks later. The figure that appeared in my account was staggering, so large it barely looked real, but there was no rush of excitement. No sense of victory. I stared at the numbers on the screen and felt only a profound sense of responsibility. This wasn't a prize. It was a tool. Test. I didn't buy a new house. I didn't buy a flashy car. I stayed in Reggie's quiet guest room, still waking before dawn, still drinking coffee on the porch while the sun came up. I met with financial planners and lawyers. I worked on spreadsheets and projections. I knew exactly what I had to do. The money was tainted by my daughter-in-law's betrayal, and I knew I could never find peace by spending it on myself. But I could use it to wash away the stain. I could turn it into something clean, something worthy of the woman whose memory I cherished more than anything in this world. The final scene of my story took place 6 months later. On a bright, cloudless afternoon, I was standing on a small, makeshift stage in the park where Rose and I used to take Mason when he was little, the same park where we once dreamed of building something that would outlast us. A crowd had gathered, friends, old neighbors, local leaders, and families I didn't even know. Behind me, a white banner fluttered gently in the breeze. It read, "Groundbreaking ceremony for the Rose Quinn Community Centenary." Had used every single penny of my share to create the Rose Quinn Foundation. Its mission was simple: to give others the chances my own family had thrown away, to build futures instead of destroying them. The foundation would provide scholarships for underprivileged kids, grants for single parents working 2 jobs, and mentorship programs for those who just needed a hand instead of a handout. It was the only way I knew to honor her, my Rose. Her love had never been about wealth or comfort. It had been about people. About building something that lasted. I stood at the podium, my hands resting on the worn wood, the sunlight warm on my shoulders. I spoke about Rose, about her kindness, her strength, Her belief that a community was only as strong as its compassion. I spoke about promises, the ones we make, the ones we keep, and the ones that define us. And as I looked out over the crowd, at all the hopeful faces her name would now help lift, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Then, near the edge of the gathering, just beyond the rows of folding chairs, I saw her. Claire. She stood alone beneath the shade of an old oak tree, half hidden, half exposed, like a ghost too ashamed to step into the light. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, faded dress. The arrogance that once framed every gesture was gone too, replaced by a slump in her shoulders that spoke of something heavier than shame, a lifetime's worth of regret. Her face was thinner, her eyes hollow but clear. And for the first time, there was no hatred there, just sorrow, and a quiet understanding that came too late. She wasn't watching a ceremony. She was watching a life she could have been part of, a legacy she had been meant to help carry, a ghost at a feast she had once been invited to share. Our eyes met across the distance. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. The anger had long since burned itself out, leaving only a deep, aching sadness for the daughter-in-law I had lost, and for the son who had lost himself along the way. The band began to play softly, and the crowd clapped as the first shovel broke ground. The sound echoed across the park like a heartbeat, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I could almost feel Rose's hand on mine, warm, steady, proud. I held her gaze for a long moment. Then I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation. It was simply an acknowledgement, a quiet recognition that she was there, that she was still part of this story, even if her role in it was a tragic one. The door to my heart wasn't completely closed, but the long road back to it was one she would have to walk entirely on her own. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then she turned and slowly walked away, disappearing into the shade beneath the oak. When the speeches ended and the first shovel of dirt broke ground, I found myself standing alone beside the bronze plaque bearing Rose's smiling face. The sunlight was warm on my back. The sound of children laughing in the park floated through the air, soft, distant, and pure. And for the first time in a very long time, peace settled over me, a peace I had thought I would never feel again. I looked up toward the clear blue sky, as if I might somehow see her there, watching. Money can buy a house, I whispered to the quiet air, but it can never build a home. I paused, letting the words linger in the breeze. A real legacy isn't what you leave for people, I said softly. It's what you build inside them. A gentle wind moved through the park, stirring the leaves of the old oak tree, and I knew I had kept my promise. I had taken care of our girl in the only way left to me, and I had taken care of the people who still believed in something better, in hard work, in decency, in each other. My work was done. I kept my promise, Rose, I whispered, a quiet smile touching my lips. You can rest now. This whole ordeal taught me something I will never forget. Money is like a floodlight. It doesn't change what's there. It just illuminates what's been hiding in the shadows all along. It revealed the greed in my daughter-in-law's heart, but it also revealed the uncheckable loyalty of my friends, the men who stood with me when everything else fell apart. I learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in promises kept, in character held firm, and in the lives you lift up along the way. A man's real legacy isn't the fortune he leaves behind, it's the integrity he lives by. And that's a treasure no one can ever take away from you. What would you have done in my place? Do you think a bond that's been broken so deeply can ever be repaired? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and if this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe and share your own story down there in the comments. Your voice matters.